I don't want a minute or a watch.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Brian Shoup, I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Natural Resources Council. VNRC was founded in 1963 to advocate for clean water, clean energy, healthy forest and wildlife, and sustainable communities. We're a nonpartisan organization, but one of our goals as an organization is to make sure that our members and friends are well informed about the environmental issues facing them and making informed votes about the candidates who will support their values and their goals. So I want to thank everybody for coming. We're going to get right to the debate. Right after I turn it over to Lauren Hurl.
Hi everyone. So I'm Lauren Hurl, the Political Director for Vermont Conservation Voters. And VCV is the only group really actively working on the ground to help elect pro-environment candidates. We are a nonpartisan organization as well. We endorse candidates and we work to educate voters on issues they care about, such as through events like tonight's debate. We work in communities to support candidates who are fighting for action on climate change, clean water, healthy forests, historic downtowns and village centers, and Vermont's traditional working landscape. This is an extremely important election, as you all know, and VCV is ready and committed to fight hard to elect candidates who make protecting Vermont's environment a priority. We also convene the environmental community to develop an environmental common agenda of legislative priorities and then work to advocate for those at the State House and hold elected officials accountable for their votes on environmental issues. So excited to see so many of you here tonight and appreciate how many of you provided potential questions for us to consider. We took that input into consideration as we developed the short list of questions we have time for tonight, so thank you for doing that. I want to introduce Ann Galloway. She is going to be moderating the event for us tonight. She is the founder of BT Digger, and for more than 20 years, Ann has been an editor and reporter in Vermont, so we are so excited to have her expertise here with us. So welcome and thank you, Ann. And Ann will describe the format of the questions before each question for the candidates. Tonight, the Republican candidates, as you can see here, Bruce Listman and Phil Scott will debate first, and then we will have the Democratic candidates at 7:30, Sue Minter, Matt Dunn, and Peter Galbraith. So an hour each for the Democrats and Republicans. We've asked the Democrats to leave, so there's no unfair hearing the questions ahead of time. And last but not least, I very much want to thank the candidates for taking time out of their really busy campaign schedules to be here tonight and share their views on these issues that so many Vermonters care about. I think this full room really speaks to how passionate so many of us are about these issues, and so really excited to hear more about how each of you, were you to be elected governor, think about and lead on environmental issues in your administration. So turning it over to Ann Galloway.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you, candidates. We're going to start with a pretty general question about the environment, and we'll have a 2-minute response. And you'll see right in front of you there, we've got some very friendly VNRC folks with stop signs. You get 50, they'll show you 1 minute, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and then stop. Maybe briefly, if you could, just say who you are. And then tell us what you think the most pressing environmental issue is facing Vermont. And we'll start with Bruce Listman and get 2 minutes on this response, and then Phil Scott.
Well, good evening, and thanks for organizing, and thanks for being here. It's a beautiful evening. In other states, people come only when it's raining sometimes. So I'm Bruce Listman, running for governor, Republican. Phil and I are on the Republican side. I grew up in Burlington, and here I am. I would like to talk to you about the environmental matters that matter the most to me. And so 3 priorities: water, water, and water. Why spread ourselves too thin when we usually have a narrow set of resources? I think Lake Champlain, which I've been off and on my entire life, is in deep trouble. The tributaries are suffering from considerable damage. This was not a recent phenomenon. In 1954, I was at a very young age, was camping with family members in the Siskoi and discovered an amazing fish kill, which I remember perfectly well. A couple of cans of red paint did the deal. I remember red tides going through St. Albans Bay and no swimming, no playing in the water. But I also think there are bigger efforts that have to be done as well, whether it's in the urban areas, parking lots that allow water to run fast into what's likely to be the lake eventually, or into our rivers, or whether it's storm water catchments that we really haven't built, or in fact sewage systems that are in some cases not capable of handling in certain areas growing population. Meanwhile, soon enough we'll discover the Connecticut River requires remedial action as well. There are other matters of importance in the environmental world. I focused on water, and I hope to have the opportunity to talk to you about my plan for beginning a long-term process of cleaning Lake Champlain of some of the more difficult things to remove, phosphorus and its related things. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much. My name is Phil Scott. I grew up in Barrie, served in the legislature, served 10 years in the Senate before becoming lieutenant governor. 20 years ago, I didn't have a political bone in my body, and I started complaining a lot about what they then were doing to me in Montpelier in my business. So I thought, I finally woke up one morning after looking at myself in the mirror and thought, maybe I ought to step up. Maybe I ought to be part of the solution instead of the problem. And when I first was elected, I thought everything was black and white. I thought, you know, this is a case where you just make a decision, yes or no. But I soon learned, after being there a short period of time, that there's a lot of gray area, a lot of transitional issues that take a lot of thought, and it's about balance. And so what I've learned, and I've always served in the minority in my political life, so I've learned to reach consensus, learned to build and facilitate some compromise. I've learned how to work with others, and I think that that's important, especially for environment, environmental issues that we face. I've lived here all my life, and I don't want to live anywhere else. And I want to balance in some way the issues that face us today. I think we have a crisis of affordability in Vermont. I think that we need to pay attention to our economic issues. But in that is protecting our branding, protecting our environment, trying to do whatever we can to boost the economy, but at the same time, making sure that we protect what's important to us so that we can continue to have tourism as one of our top industries, so we can continue to be the leader in certain areas in environmental issues that others face throughout the country. So I look forward to working with all of you. As most of you know, I've had an open door policy throughout my political life, and I would continue to do so as governor. So thank you for having us.
Thank you, Phil. You didn't quite answer the question. So,
the top issue. Well, I think it's about energy. I think it's about energy issues. I think that's one of our top concerns. It is for me. How we cite some of our renewable energy projects, as well as the lake cleanup, as well as ongoing Act 250 concerns. And again, how do we balance our environmental concerns with the growing economy? So I think all of those together, it's an ongoing process. There's not one single issue that is facing us today that is an ongoing issue.
Thank you very much. It has to do with climate and I'm going to start with you, Phil, and you guys get 2 minutes for the initial response, and then you can follow up with the rebuttal to each other's responses. So the updated comprehensive energy plan reaffirms the state's goal of meeting 90% of our total energy needs from renewable sources by 2050. So this is yes or no to start, and then you can follow up. Do you support this goal? Yes or no? If no, why not?
Yes, I support the goal. Whether or not we can get there by 2050 is dependent on a lot of issues. I think technology is something that will drive the discussion. I've said consistently that, and I've been a fan of renewables ever since I was in college. In fact, I helped build one of the first turbines at UVM. I built the blades that flew over the engineering building for a number of years. And so it's part of all of us have different goals and aspirations. Mine is to be independent. I think we can be energy independent. I think that the quicker that we reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, the better off we'll be from a world conflict standpoint alone. So I'm a proponent of that. I believe that once again that we can achieve that if everything falls into place, and I would include with renewables, biomass projects. Solar, I think, is something that is going to continue to change from a technological standpoint, and we should continue. I think that's where it's at. I think wind, from my standpoint, isn't considered. I don't think that that's our answer at all. I think it's inefficient. I think destroying our ridge lines is something that isn't in our best interest as a state. But again, the game changer will be energy storage. When we can solve the issue technologically of storing vast amounts of energy from DC power sources, that'll be the answer, and that'll be a game changer for us as a country as well.
Thank you, Bruce.
No, I don't support it. Well, first, let me tell you, I might ask you, how many of you have actually read the plan that was put out by the Department of Public Service? I read it as well, but I didn't think it was a plan. I thought it was an excellent set of ideas. But a real plan would offer up a whole bunch of notions that it didn't. More precise notion of pluses and minuses, of pros and cons, the cost to do it, the consequence of doing it, matters of technology. Bill Gates's policy shop would say that without considering innovation, a plan going out more than a year or two is not of great value. And so I believe that wasn't so much as a plan, but rather an aspirational paper. So I think following a plan like a notion like that without considering alternatives is, in fact, dangerous. Put us on a rigid path that may be disrupted not only by innovation or new technologies, but also a reconsideration of the cost of certain types of renewables. In Denmark, which is all renewable, in a country I admire, and I've been there to see some of that renewable industry, built a coalition, but it didn't happen from day one. It didn't happen with lots of disruption. And I fear a coalition for renewables, which I favor, will be broken by siting issues. I've said we need a moratorium on siting big wind because it does not take into account the needs of people in towns that require both a vote and equal influence. I believe it doesn't consider, as Denmark now requires, environmental impact statements. In Denmark, it would ask that the developer make up for loss of property values, even include those who live within 4,000 or 5,000 feet, an opportunity to own a small equity interest in it. And the truth is, as Green Mountain Power has bought out 2 houses, other developers have refused to buy out houses that are frankly unlivable. So I tell you, aspirational goals are good, and I support that. If it's 90%, let it be. But we ought to have a real plan, reflecting real life issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you guys want to rebut each other on this one, or should we move on?
I think we can move on, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, let's move on. All right. Well, both of you seem to, neither one of you seem to be fans of big wind. So How about large-scale solar, yes or no? And then you can explain in 1 minute why you support it or you don't like large solar.
Who do you want to go first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Bruce, you go first.
Okay. I wasn't volunteering, but I'm happy.
We just did.
Yeah, okay. I was just, listen, I like solar. I certainly like it a lot more than I like big wind. But I also believe that big solar, like big wind, this is industrial sized, needs to be sited in a way that fits in with the environment. Doesn't make its own environment, fits into the environment. I think the same rights that I would propose for people in the way of big wind should be allowed for big solar. In particular, let me say, a good democracy reflects the will of the majority, but is mindful of those in a minority position. In my opinion, this land rush, if you will, for renewables has ignored the rights of people and of certain towns, and I think that's a big time mistake. It will ruin a coalition for renewables because people are beginning to stand up and say, not here, but also saying, not anywhere. And I think that's a big mistake. So solar, I like it, but we need to have siting rules that reflect the needs of the people right there.
So, was that a yes?
What was the vote?
Large solar, yes or no?
I like it, but I've said the same thing. I said we should have a moratorium until we can reconsider siting rules that reflect the needs and will of people in towns that oftentimes are no match for the power of developers. We're not talking about 50 developers, we're talking about a handful of developers.
Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
Okay, Phil.
I would say yes. I think if we were going to reach that goal, and it is a goal of renewables, 90% renewables by 2050, you have to have large-scale solar. And again, it does have to be properly sited. I think there has to be input from local communities, and it has to be, everyone has to have a seat at the table. You also have to figure out where you need it, not to just build it, because there's tax incentives involved and that it's financially feasible to do so. It's about making sure you put it in the right places, making sure that you put it in the areas that need the power, and that you can have the transmission lines going to and from, so that that doesn't create more destruction in the future as well. So again, I think that if we're going to reach this goal by 2050, we have to consider large-scale solar as well.
Thank you. Next question is also 1 minute, and we'll start with Phil this time. The comprehensive energy plan assumes an overall reduction in energy use of 30%. How will you fund energy efficiency and conservation measures?
Well, I think that we're actually doing that now. I think with some of the plans in place to date, I think that we can continue that goal. I think conservation is part of, certainly, one of the things that we can do most efficiently. I think that that's something that's critical to our energy development in the future, making sure that we're efficient in all kinds of ways. It's something that I'm fairly frugal in nature. And I think that, again, what we need to do, just like we do in our own lives, we try and cut back the use in any way we can to try and stretch the use of any other products that we have as well. So I'm in favor of continuing down the path that we've started, and I'm sure that we'll continue to conserve in many different ways.
Funding?
Funding would be, we're utilizing the same sources as we do now on the utility bills that we currently have.
Thank you. Okay, Bruce.
Well, yes, energy efficiency is really important. Weatherization is extraordinarily important, particularly with an older stock of housing. Further south you go and further north that you go in our state, the older the housing stock is. And so everything from insulation to window caulking to even a change of roof and some opportunities to do other things. I'm having a problem, but not with the notion of efficiency or saving electricity and other usages, but I'm having a problem because everywhere I go, I find out there's a program for weatherization. I think we need a comprehensive look at how much we are doing and what we're actually accomplishing. In another state, you can literally pull up their site in some place. I couldn't find it, but I was told there. You can see red X's where weather efficiency is already taking place, whether it's a commercial building or a residential building. I think we need to see things like that. The utility we created is well financed. And I think in the future, it is going to have to prove that it is of the value that we expected for the money they receive. And that would be a good thing.
Thank you. So we're going to shift a little bit. We're still on energy, but we're shifting a little bit. So I'm going to start with you, Bruce. If all Vermont's existing energy policies are fully implemented, Vermont will still fall short of the 90% goal by more than half. Economists on the right and the left have identified the carbon pollution tax as a policy that could incentivize fossil fuel conservation and fund projects like weatherization and public transportation. Do you support carbon pricing, yes or no? If yes, what would it look like? If not, how will you meet Vermont's statutory goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2050?
No, I don't support carbon tax. I support the notions behind it, and I think it's a worthy discussion. But no, I think there's balance to these things. So for every incremental dollar we're going to pull out of the economy, we need to find a dollar. And in this case, this is going to be awfully expensive. Trust in our government, this notion of what our government would do and whether they could do it well, just isn't there. We've had a bad 5 or 6 years. And our sense of disbelief is as high as it's, I think, ever been. I think you'd be hard-pressed to build a coalition in support of that in the business community, but also people who drive cars. And hardly anybody believes it will be recycled in a proper way, or even who would recycle that money in what the discussion is worthy. Doing it on our own is a really bad idea. I mean, a bad idea. We have a fragile, thin, old economy. The further away you get from Chittenden County, the thinner and older and more fragile it is. Raising a cost without an effective way of proving value is a hard sell. In my opinion, would raise the cost of doing business in ways we can't imagine. I would urge us, if we're going to think about, first, I like cap and trade, but I think there's a movement nationally to do it. And really, we should join a national movement if we're going to do things like this. This is not a state that wants to be experimented upon anymore. I listen to people, and they are tired of hearing that word petri dish. They're beginning to think it's them in that dish. That's not how we need to go forward. And I urge you to bring caution to this discussion, and I really think there are better ways of going. Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I do not think the carbon tax is the answer. And when you look at it, doing it solely alone as a Vermont would put us at an unfair disadvantage with other states when we think about our commerce, when we think about our economy. It just ratchets up the cost of living in Vermont that we have identified as a problem here in this state. When I go out and talk with Vermonters, they're working 2 and 3 jobs now, trying to make ends meet, struggling to get by, pay their property taxes, pay their rent, put food on the table, and they're not able to do that. So increasing the cost of gas and oil and propane, natural gas, all the carbon emitting products is just going to raise that cost of living on already vulnerable Vermonters. So I think there is a more appropriate national solution, at least a Northeast coalition that should take place so that it doesn't put our businesses at a disadvantage. So without that, and I think that that could be done, again, on a national scale or from a Northeast perspective. Without that, I would not be in favor of a carbon tax.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk about land use a little bit, and again, we'll have a 2-minute response, and we'll start with Phil. The locations where we build homes, businesses, and services affects how the landscape looks and functions, and how much energy we use, particularly for transportation. What types of land use planning policies and investments would you promote?
Well, I'm a proponent of trying to rebuild our communities, our downtowns. I think that's something that when you get around Vermont and you see some of the dilapidated, to be honest with you, some of the dilapidated downtowns that we have in Vermont, I think about some of those economic areas that are really struggling to get by. And I think that we have to invest in those areas. And again, when I look back on on what our challenges are. I think we have a stagnant population, about 620,000 people. It's been that way for a couple of decades, but we're losing our youth because of the demographic shift. We're getting older. So we've lost about 30,000 people out of this age group from 25 to 45. And when you have 30,000 less people in that category, that's the workforce. Those are the folks that buy homes, have families, utilize services, buy products and so forth, and pay taxes. So when you have less of them, then what we have is a problem with revenue sources. So what I think we should do is try and rebuild that sector, trying to grow our population a bit, and try and backfill that. But what we need is affordable housing for our workforce. And I think that's in our downtowns. I think that investing through capital investments, some tax incentives, much like we've done with our solar industry, is totally appropriate. Trying to find ways to help in terms of infrastructure in our downtowns, trying to, in some of the brownfields that we are going to be exposed in some of our downtowns, is a way of cleaning up our environment and maximizing the use of some of that infrastructure that's already there. And from that standpoint, there'll be more community building and more public transit and so forth in those communities. So I think our youth like to be in downtowns. They've shifted. Their thoughts are different than they used to be in the past.
Thank you.
Tell me, Ian,
Yes.
exactly what your question was again.
Yeah, sure. What types of land use planning policies and investments would you promote?
Yeah, so that's what I thought it was. So this is really interesting because people who like to live in town, whatever your definition is, would like the opportunity to walk to a restaurant or walk to a movie theater or walk to a grocery store. In most of our towns, that's not an easy walk, for one thing. And riding a bike, Phil does ride his bike a lot, so he could tell you more about the dangers of that in some ways, but it is not always bike friendly out there. So when we speak of it, we speak in somewhat idealized terms. Burlington is walkable if you're near those things, but smaller communities are not as walkable, and oftentimes there's not available rentals or even opportunities to own downtown. So I'd like to say I would encourage it, places like Bennington and Brattleboro and Rutland and Newport, and towns that have really been hurt over the last 15 years. Significant population losses have taken place. I leave it to the towns to find themselves and find their own path. We've passed legislation that encourages development in our towns. We had adjustments to Act 250 2 years ago, I think, that discouraged duplication of regulatory effort, and I think that goes a long way. But many of us live not in towns, but in rural areas, or requires either you gotta be a serious marathon walker and plan your day ahead of time, or you're gonna get in your car. And I think that's a certain reality in a rural state like ours, where the majority of people do not live in Burlington or other town-centered areas. That said, there's plenty to do, but I think it should be part of a broader package of thinking about our towns, small or large, as more livable. And in the process of that, we're going to have to change certain habits. So Burlington is discussing its downtown development. Rutland is absolutely pulling itself together after a large population loss, but other towns need to do the same. And it's all going to come from within, and the business community is going to play a big part.
Perfect, thank you. Vermont data show that forest parcels are being broken up into smaller parcels as a result of development. Forest fragmentation can have a negative impact on certain plants and animals, working lands, and more. I'm going to start with you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Would you support strengthening Act 250 to maintain healthy forests? What other policies would you promote to conserve forests?
You know that saying, person who thinks a hammer is always looking for a nail? I'm a tree guy. I've been, if not obsessed with, I've been in love with the whole nature of trees, and have been since I was planting trees in our backyard. Not that my father anticipated seeing them there. And I'm chairman of the board of American Forests, the oldest citizens conservation group. One of the founders was Theodore Roosevelt. We've planted 5 million trees, 5.5 50 million trees. We'll plant 2.5 million this year. So I am a tree guy. On the other hand, I actually read the report on forest fragmentation. I have a number of basic issues with it. For one thing, their expectations for population growth are way off. They said 85,000 people will be here, additional people will be here by 2030. That would make you happy, but it's not happening. And in fact, that wasn't what the report said. The report said the best case was 45,000. The worst case was 5,000, and I'd say it's going to be down 10 or 15,000. Second, when they looked at forest fragmentation and they looked at development of, quote, towns under 2,500 people, I did some work and couldn't find it, but I did find it in ski areas, small towns, big ski areas around it. And so therefore, I got the notion of partialization, as I learned, that's a new phrase, of forests and concern about what to do with it. On the other hand, they do have their rights, and I think there's going to be, if we're going to have a fragmentation solution, it's going to have to include grandfathering some of those owners, because otherwise they'll do the unintended consequence of doing it now in anticipation of legislation in the future. I can tell you that, not now, but hopefully another opportunity, American Forest has helped save 2 species, 2 birds, but we had to negotiate new deals with EPA about the nature of those things and what farmers are actually allowed to do. Anticipating a bird would go on the endangered list caused vast deforestation in the southeastern part of the United States until we stepped in and said there's a different way to do this.
So Bruce, is it fair to say that you don't support strengthening Act 250?
No, I support, I'm a big fan of our forests and the value, and this is the best vacuum cleaner we'll ever find for the atmosphere. I would say that report needs to be redone, and I'd like to see more evidence that fragmentation is an issue we need to pour resources in. My conclusion after reading the report was, first, I wish I'd read it before. The assumptions aren't so good, and I'd like to know a lot more before I say we need to do something now.
Great, thanks.
I'd actually agree with Bruce on this one. I'm not sure. The forest fragmentation is a new issue that seems to be brought up in the last few years. I'm not sure that it's an issue that needs attention quite as much as some of the other issues that we're facing right now. And I would point back to 100 years ago when you look at some of the pictures around the state that we had actually a lot less forests than we do today. So I think we've done remarkably well in rebuilding some of our forests that we lost through the use of land clearing and so forth. So I'm not looking for strengthening Act 250 in that area at this point in time. I'd like to see what the results are of that study that's going on now, and before we move forward on that. But I would say that we need to continue to try and make investments with the ECB in some of our land, trying to preserve some of those large tracts of land for the use of our forest industry, as well as our farming community. So investments in that sector should continue, as we have been.
May I add something?
Sure.
I lost track.
Sure, one minute rebuttal.
Oh, that's not a rebuttal.
Okay.
So, but part of the Lake Champlain EPA complaint and the state's response has revolved around something called forest roads. You may not know this. U.S. Forestry, which is not a parent, but a longtime partner of American Forest, so I love them. We need them. But they are among the largest road builders that America has ever seen. So they were happy to cut a new road through any forest. There are forest roads that are a source of pollution in our lakes and streams, and they do need to be closed because really they're not even logging roads anymore. And if we allow room enough for people to walk or ATVs to get through, if that's a place where they run, we'll be well served by replanting some of those roads that are direct causes of washed out silt and topsoil, and so as well as leaves. So that's a part that report didn't really speak of, but it's a very real problem around the country and around Champlain.
Thank you. Phil, do you have anything you want to add?
No.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about water quality. Phosphorus pollution in Lake Champlain has hurt tourism, closed beaches, created blue-green algae blooms, and impaired fisheries. Vermont is required by federal law to restore water quality in the lake. In 2015, the Vermont legislature passed the Vermont Clean Water Act, which establishes a Clean Water Fund that puts a 0.2% surcharge on property transfers. That funding mechanism ends on July 1st, 2018. So here's the question, yes, no. Starting with Bruce, do you support maintaining the Clean Water Fund after 2018? If so, how will you fund it in order to address pollution in Lake Champlain?
Sure, because there's no money in it. It's a tiny source of funds. Right now, it gets 0.2%. Here's a way to increase its funding, which is to flip places with a Vermont Housing and Conservation Fund, which gets the lion's share, significant, 3 times as much, I think 3 times as much as Clean Water Fund. That would place you, our fellow Vermonters, if you will, with a choice. What do you think is more important? Conservation and housing, or cleanup of water? And so so my point is, it's not a lot of money at the moment. We have gigantic needs for money to source a cleanup of Lake Champlain. And I think there are really opportunities without messing with the formula, though actually I would recommend it. I think there's a large market for performance type bonds, but also green bonds, which is to say, just for example, a $35 million bond issuance that would pay 1%, that's below even today's market, below interest rates, for 10 years, if the state is successful in using that money. Carefully prescribed ways to use the money with demonstrable evidence that they've done it right, or would pay, say, 6 or 7% if they fail to do that. That gets to the skepticism many people have about our government's ability to solve problems. I guess people think about Healthcare Connect when they say that. But it also gets to important issues, which is this is a long-term deal cleaning Lake Champlain, just as one example, and almost certainly will take 10 years to even show evidence enough that you, fellow Vermonters, feel like, yes, this is the way to go. And the way to do that is to use those red dots, the LiDAR that says, here's a critical source area that's leaking phosphates. I would call it emissions, it's called what it is. And flip it from red to green as we remediate it. And that's the way to build a coalition in support of water. And by the way, Lake Champlain is really the first. We have to go to things like that.
Well, we just saw this week with the release of the summary from the TMDL, from the EPA, and we certainly have a challenge ahead of us if we're going to adhere to that goal. We did pass Act 64, which created a Clean Water Fund Board, and their charge is to come up with sources of funding. And I think that we'll see that in 2017, the results of that board and their work. I think they're actively working on that right now. And I look forward to what they come up with. Obviously, there's got to be a balance. Once again, we didn't get into this situation overnight. We're not going to get out of it overnight. And I've already identified that I think we're facing as a state a crisis of affordability. I think that if we don't do something about restoring and revitalizing our economy, we're not going to have money to continue to put into programs that are important, such as this, the lake cleanup and so forth, and other programs that are important to our everyday lives and helping the most vulnerable and so forth. So we first have to admit that we have an issue with this affordability with our economy, that we're going to have to, I think, focus on that like a laser for the next 2 to 4 years, so that we can fulfill our promise to clean up the lake and clean up other sources of water throughout Vermont. But again, I think that we have to focus on the economy first if we're going to have the resources necessary to do the cleanup in the future.
Thank you very much.
May I add to that? Are you letting you do a...
Is this a rebuttal or is this an add-on? Well, you know what, there's more on this issue, so maybe you can save it for the second question on this topic. Okay, the Vermont Clean Water Act and TMDL recently issued by EPA includes a number of regulatory measures to reduce phosphorus load into Lake Champlain. The measures are designed to stem pollution from commercial and residential development, public roads, wastewater control, farms, and forests. Okay, here's the question. Phil, you go first. What types of regulations would you propose to reduce water pollution?
Well, again, certainly this is something that we've been facing for quite a number of years. When I was chair of the Institutions Committee, we had the Agency of Natural Resources would come in yearly to talk about some of our municipal sewage treatment plants and the need for phosphorus removal. And then we put millions of dollars into some of our municipal sewage treatment plants, and also separation of storm and sewer projects throughout Vermont. But what we found out was that the result was that the reduction of phosphorus in the municipal sewage treatment plants was so minimal. It was very small, incremental bites at the apple, so to speak. But what the big problem was in the non-point sources. And so when you look at some of our farming community, they've pinpointed that that's where a lot of our phosphorus is coming from. Those large tracts of land, things that we do, part of our tradition, and so forth. So what we need to do, I think, is to reestablish the priority, to try and help in those sectors, trying to put our limited resources in areas where we get the biggest bang for our buck. And I think that we have to go hand in hand with the farming community. I don't think that it's fair to just point them out and make them pay solely. I think this is a state problem. We're all in this together. We've all benefited from our farming community. As I said, it's part of our tradition, part of our DNA, and we have an obligation to help them as they help us. So again, trying to focus on those areas with different types of agricultural practices, as well as other methods that I'm sure we'll get into.
Thank you.
I don't think we need new regulations. I think we merely have to enforce those that we have today. So back to my $35 million bond issue. So it's a big task, Lake Champlain. And so I propose focusing on the northern end of the lake. It's the worst and sickest part. It's been sick the longest. And sorry, that was me. The analogy is poor, but when I was a kid, homework was not the first thing on my mind. It would build up, and then I'd say, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get to this? I need to start and go to sleep. We can't go to sleep on this, so I say, let's start with a bite of this, the worst part of it. So $35 million offering to farmers who want to sell the land that are involved with critical source areas. Again, I would change the name to make it English. And completely optional, they can sell their land for nearly market price, and within that, we have enough money to remediate it. American Forest is doing a project now in the southern basin. We're going to plant 24,000 trees, 10 miles riparian area, 3 deep, for a cost of about $200,000 at the maximum. So that gives you a sense of what we can accomplish on the Pike River and Missisquoi and the tributaries. And I really believe that's where we have to start. And by the way, there are good experimental programs in Grantsport that we have to do in the metropolitan areas, if you will. So, if you will, St. Albans Bay, using grass swales and alternatives that would slow the run of stormwater, which is seriously expensive. If we can't find an alternative to building another plant, we'll really be cooked. And so many towns, small and large, are going with experimental programs to see if they can slow the flow of water down, and that has had a sizable impact elsewhere. So there are things to do. I think the dairy industry thought they were doing the right things for a decade and only discovered in the last 2 or 3 years that, no, we don't think that worked. And so they're willing, and they're able to help. But I think this is an all-in. I think the business community will join this, and I think you and I, as citizens, will join in.
Okay, you guys are doing really well. Torture's almost over. I have 1 page of questions left.
Did you start with two?
Yeah, we got through 2 already, right? Right, 3 pages, so, okay, toxic chemicals. And we're gonna start with Bruce. Here's a little explainer. There are more than 85,000 chemicals registered in the United States, but the EPA has only tested about 200 for health and safety, and has only ever restricted the use of 5 chemicals. The state of Vermont has gone above federal standards to restrict harmful chemicals. Yes or no? Bruce goes first. Do you support Vermont continuing to enforce and enact stricter chemical standards? 1 minute.
1,002, no, I don't. Let me just say that it's a politicized world. If I were elected governor, I would eliminate all acronyms, as well as elevator music, if you can find that. But acronyms are killing us, and pseudo research is hurting us. And, so the answer is no. Not that I don't think we have qualified people to do it, but the legislature is not given a lot of resources to do the research. They are very dependent upon advocates. Nothing wrong, it's a constitutional right, lobbyists too. I really think it's something our country is supposed to do. Indeed, there's some legislation beginning to brew yet again, has a likely chance of passage in the next session that would provide both an overview of chemicals that will likely move into that list and chemicals that should be on the list. And so I don't think the state should dedicate resources to that. We're tight on resources and long on need, and I think that's one we shouldn't spend a lot of time on.
Thank you, Phil.
Again, I think that we have a law in place at this point in time, and we passed, I think it was Act 188, and it hasn't, I'm not even sure it's been through complete rulemaking at this point. And I think that that's something that we need to continue to see the effects of that as it works its way out. And I think that we have to take our lead from the feds. We can't do everything alone. And certainly we want to make sure we protect our citizens. We need to protect our groundwater. We need to protect all of us from some of the toxic chemicals. But again, taking our lead from the EPA, from the feds, is probably going to be our most advantageous recourse at this point in time.
Thank you very much. So, on the same theme, high levels of the toxic chemical PFOA have been found in drinking water supplies in Bennington County. According to the Vermont Department of Health, PFOA is linked to high blood pressure, decreased birth weight, immune system effects, thyroid disease, kidney cancer, and testicular cancer. The state of Vermont has set a high health standard of 20 parts per trillion of the toxic chemical PFOA in drinking water, which is more protective than the federal advisory level. Do you stand by the Department of Health's proposed standard for PFOA? Yes, no, 30 seconds only. Phil, you go first.
That's going to be a tough one to yes or no. I would stand by and with that at this point in time. I think this is probably going to lead to some legal argument in the near future. I think that the administration has done an adequate job in trying to identify and protect and try to do something about the PFOAs in the Bennington County area. But I think, again, St. Gobain has been a willing partner, but I'm not sure how long that's going to continue with this, the 20 parts per million is going to be an issue in the future.
Thank you.
Well, I would stand by the department. It's a little bit at odds with what I just said about chemicals, but when we discover an overabundance of certain chemicals in our drinking water, a cause for alarm, that's remarkably different than where the legislation on chemicals was heading before. And so I think there's likely to be more testing of water, both voluntary and in some cases mandated as testers. But I also think that's a long-term legal case that's going to take place. Water is an essential ingredient to a healthy, even any kind of life. And so my prediction is both the feds and the state are going to be more focused on water and water quality.
Okay, we're going to switch the pace up a little bit here. Lightning round session. Yes, no, only. You guys are going to love this. Bruce, starting with you. Do you believe that human activities are the primary driver of climate change? Yes or no?
Yeah.
How about you, Phil?
Yes.
Okay. Do you support full statutory funding for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board? That's for you, Phil, first. Yes or no? Let me repeat the question.
I heard it. Yes, but I would like to see them focus on housing more than conservation.
Okay, great. Bruce?
That is a great answer, and I agree with him. So I guess the answer is partial.
So that's maybe?
I like not being definitive.
Okay, Bruce, you next on this one. Would you cut or maintain downtown development tax credits? Yes or no?
Would I cut them?
Yeah.
No.
Okay. So,
No, I'd increase them.
okay, great.
I wouldn't increase them.
Oh, this is awesome. Okay.
You have a low threshold.
Okay, last question. Tell us one person, historical or current, who you see as an environmental leader who has influenced how you might lead on these issues, and you can take, you can take a little time with this one. Right? Let's give them a minute or 2 minutes if you want. And Bruce, you start. So an environmental leader who's influenced how you might lead on these issues.
Yes, well, I have to be a fan of Theodore Roosevelt, both as a president and environmentalist, but also outspoken critic of things he thought were wrong in a different kind of country, but with many of the same issues today. So he had a broad array of interests, and if you've read biographies of him, you know he was quite the guy. Energy, there was no shortage of energy behind his ideas. But I am chairman of the board of American Forests. We've been around a long time. We plant trees. We plant trees in the right places as well, the right kinds of trees. If I could give you 2 examples of why, I don't want to get into why I'm crazy for trees because I can't explain it myself, but I plant a lot of trees. We had a tree canopy program done through the Preservation Trust of Vermont that affected 22 or 24 towns. I did it anonymously, but it's come out in papers and stuff. So, because I believe we need to restore our town's canopies, particularly small towns. American Forests is deeply involved in the ecosystem. So I'm only kidding. So by planting more than 1 million jack pines in northern Michigan, we helped save the Kirtland warbler. You may not have heard of, but if you're a bird person, it was practically gone. Today, it's in danger of being removed from the endangered list because we planted 1 million+ jack pines. In South Carolina, where I visited a couple of weeks ago, we planted 380,000 longleaf yellow pines. Hugo wiped out the area, go slow there, wiped out the area, but on top of that, farmers, knowing full well that the red-cockaded woodpecker, of which there are only 2,000, lived in their woods, they began cutting, and they only live in longleaf yellow pine. We began cutting those trees down and replacing them with loblolly pine. A logical thing to do. We struck a deal with farmers, we struck a deal with EPA, an innovative thing, along with the Longleaf Pine Association, and we allowed them to transfer these woodpeckers, when there were 4 or more found on a parcel. So we planted 380,000 trees. They'll be ready for occupancy. These woodpeckers only live in 1 tree, they have to be alive, and they have to be above the fire line, which is to say, they'll be ready. These trees that we planted in 1991, 2, and 3 will be ready in about 20 years.
Thank you.
I was giving 30 seconds of my time. No, I was going to give it to you. My inspiration would come from actually environmentalists from here in Vermont that were not so long ago, Dean Davis being one, and another runner-up would be George Aiken. And I point to them because I think that there are times when, me being a Republican, we get a bad rap, that we're not common sense environmentalists. We don't care about the environment. And I think that we can look at our history and find that that's just not the case for many of us. And I think that as we continue to move forward, I think that we need some balance. We need to use some common sense, some practical initiatives to try and find ways to work together, and that's what I would do. And that's what they did was utilize their ability to form coalitions, to facilitate conversations, and to bridge those gaps that exist. And I think that there are many initiatives in the future where we can work together. And I think that many of those, whether it's in the renewable energy portfolio, with hydro and biomass and solar and all the above, the new technology that comes about, it's going to take some leadership, but it's going to take some give and take. And that's something that I think that those two brought to Vermont, and that I would like to continue with.
Well, thank you. You've both been great tonight, and thank you very much for your patience and thorough answers. And audience, let's give them a big round of applause.
Also, before folks get up, could we give Anne's only halfway through, but give her a big round of applause. I also want to thank Bill and Bruce for their openness and coming here tonight. I also want to mention that events like this are made possible by the folks who support the VNRC and VCB. Many of them are in the room, and I want to thank you as well. There is an opportunity to provide support for us. There's baskets at either door, and we appreciate any help that you can get. We've got about 5 minutes. There's still food left. There's drinks in the bag, so we'll be welcoming the Democratic candidates for the Democratic primary in about 5 minutes or so. I'll just
seconds.
On number 36, we can fake it. Let's go back to number 17, right? That collapsed.
So my battery is low, so please talk fast.
Okay, everybody. We're back. This time with the Democratic candidates for governor. And we're going to start with the same question, and I'm going to ask each of the candidates to say who they are and then answer the question. And they're going to have 2 minutes each. And we're going to start with Matt, and then Sue, and then Peter. So 2 minutes each. What do you think is the most pressing environmental issue facing Vermont?
On a happy note, good evening. Thank you all for coming out. Thank you all for being a part of this process. We were discussing this as probably candidate forum number 36 or so, and we are 6 weeks away from a really, really important election in the state. My name is Matt Dunn. I'm from Heartland, Vermont. Grew up there, served in the legislature, both the House and Senate, was the head of AmeriCorps Vista under the Clinton administration, and helped grow a Vermont-based software company for the last 8.5 years. Have headed up community affairs for Google from an office in White River Junction, Vermont. And the number one issue facing Vermont is the same issue that is facing people all across the world, which is climate change. There is no bigger challenge. We have a share of others, whether it's our water, whether it's our forests, or our habitat in general. But if climate change continues on the pace that it is, none of those other issues are going to matter. That is why I listened carefully when my friend Bill McKibben, about a year ago, dragged me over to Middlebury to have dinner and asked me to get into the race for governor. And he did so in his own words. He said, Matt, because we are stuck and we need to get unstuck as a state. Because Vermont is not just about Vermont. When Vermont leads, the nation follows. We absolutely need to lead on climate change. We have to do 90% renewable. We need to be investing in efficiency, which is why we created the Green Jobs Fund to bring $100 million to energy efficiency projects in apartment buildings, and we need to continue down the path for renewable energy. I am prepared as governor to lead in that charge and make sure that Vermont leads the nation on the path to sustainability and defeating climate change. Thank you.
Okay, Sue.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Sue Minter from Waterbury Center, and so pleased to be here. For me, it is very clear that the most important environmental issue, and in fact, the most important issue facing our country and our planet, is global climate change. And I know that we all know that climate change is not just real, it is here. I know we experienced that personally and intensively after Tropical Storm Irene, when 15 inches of rain overnight devastated 500 miles of road, 3,500 homes, many of them yours. And it was extraordinary to be part of leading the recovery. But after the recovery, to be appointed to represent Vermont on President Obama's task force on climate preparedness and resilience, and to be working with leaders across this country at what climate disruption is doing everywhere. It's in California with facing historic drought, Colorado facing historic fires, and then flooding. And I was so thrilled to be able to pay forward what we received from others by going to Colorado, by being asked by the governor to head a team to support them after their recovery. But this isn't a new issue to me. I've been working on environmental stewardship throughout my life. My first job out of graduate school was fighting the incinerator in Rutland with Conservation Law Foundation. I served on the board of VPER. I worked with the National Wildlife Federation on sustainable forestry and writing a report on raw log exports. I've been committing my life to environmental stewardship and leadership, and you can count on me to be a governor that focuses on the environment, on addressing the critical issues that face all of us, issues of clean water and climate change as the next governor. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Peter Galbraith from Townsend. And the environment is actually what first got me involved in public life back in 1970 when I worked on the campaign of Phil Hoff, who was running then for the US Senate in the year of Earth Day. And it was the thing that motivated me in 2010 to run for the Senate in Vermont. And it's something that I focused on in the Senate. I initiated the successful effort to make Vermont the first nation in the country to ban the destructive practice of fracking. I introduced S100 with 17 co-sponsors to provide comprehensive protection to the integrity of our forests because they're so important for biological purposes. I introduced legislation to ban neonicotinoids, which are prohibited in Europe, but in this country they are allowed, and they are what is depleting our bee crop population. And I fought an effort to try to expand the bottle bill to include non-carbonated beverages. But protecting the environment is also a hallmark of my career as a diplomat. I initiated a US government program which has now spent more than $2 billion in 1983 to assist countries in protecting wilderness and national parks. I worked with the United Nations in helping to draft the Global Convention on Biodiversity. I helped pass the very first treaty that dealt with global climate change, the 1987 Montreal Protocol on chlorofluorocarbons. I think certainly climate change is the challenge of our time, but it is part and parcel of an overall process of environmental degradation that has been going on since the Industrial Revolution, and that has been accelerating. And we need to address each of these components in Vermont.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Sue first, then Peter, then Matt. And this is 2 minutes also. The updated comprehensive energy plan reaffirms the state's goal of meeting 90% of our total energy needs from renewable sources by 2050. Do you support this goal, yes or no? If no, why not? Thank you, Sue. Go first.
I absolutely support the comprehensive energy plan because it is critical to helping us lead this country on getting away from carbon emissions and becoming energy independent. And that's exactly why today I rolled out my climate and energy plan, focusing on 2 key new goals, not just the current goals of the comprehensive energy plan, but looking at peak demand and setting a goal to reduce peak electric demand by 10% in 5 years. Why peak demand? Because it is the dirtiest fuel electricity we buy and the most expensive. And we can change that. Reduce bills, increase jobs, and reduce carbon emissions by aggressively focusing on weatherization efficiency, by looking to community solar, and by focusing on innovative technology like cold heat plants and storage batteries. Second goal is focusing on the largest part of our carbon footprint in Vermont, the transportation sector. 46% of our carbon footprint. I, for the last 3 years as Secretary of Transportation and Deputy before that, have been working on a regional transportation climate initiative, working off of the regional greenhouse gas initiative to build transportation fuels, expand from electricity only to transportation fuels. This is going to be critical. RGGI has already reduced by 24% carbon emissions across the region and brought over $11 million to Vermont for renewable energy. This is going to help reduce carbon emissions in transportation and invest in alternatives to single occupant vehicles, more transit, more rail, more electric vehicles. That's the future. That's the governor I'm going to be. I'm going to continue my leadership throughout this region. You can count on me.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes. But how do we achieve that goal? Let us focus on the steps that have the biggest payback. Investments in efficiency and conservation have dollar for dollar 10 times the reduction of carbon than any other kind of investment. So why don't we put all our effort there? Well, guess what? Large corporations do not make money on the kilowatt not generated. But that doesn't mean that's not the best public policy. So let's start with efficiency and conservation. And then, to meet our renewable energy portfolio, there's a terrific source of non-controversial renewable energy. It's the dams on the Connecticut River. I'm excited about the possibility of buying them. It would meet 1/3 of our base load. Yes, the dams caused environmental damage, but it was done 100 years ago, and they aren't going to cause any more. I'm in favor of solar. There are plenty of places in Vermont for solar. It can be done. It can be sensibly sited in accordance with town plans. We don't need to have the kind of conflict we have. I'll tell you what I'm not in favor of. I'm not in favor of destroying Vermont's ridge lines with industrial wind. The roads that go up there destroy some of the most pristine ecosystems in our state. They are not wanted by the people who live close to them. But more importantly, the energy isn't green. The renewable energy credits are sold out of state. Basically, what's going on here? Vermont's ridge lines are being sold so that Connecticut industries and Connecticut utilities can continue to burn fossil fuels and call their energy green. I don't think Vermont's ridge line should be the dumping ground for Connecticut. If they want green energy, they can put it on Connecticut hills.
Thank you, Matt.
I too support getting to 90% renewable energy by 2050. And I was honored to be a part of EAN when it started this planning process, when a group of people got together and started to methodically think through, what will it mean to get to 90% by 2050? What can we do in practical terms to be able to get there? And what can we do in terms that can create models for the rest of the state and the rest of the country? I remember being part of a working group that started the process of talking through how do we make Montpelier, right here, the first carbon neutral capital in the country. And because of many unique features of this capital, it can be done, and it should be done. Not only to be able to test things like renewable energy that is using microgrids to be able to deliver directly to the community, but also to use next generation hydro to be able to get energy from our moving water and allow it to reduce our carbon footprint. And that work was such incredible work to allow us to have the plan that we have and to be able to move forward. But I also felt it was important to have specifics early on how we would get there. And so that's why I proposed the Green Jobs Fund, which would be a bond to do efficiency work in multi-unit buildings across the state. $100 million is what we believe we can do up front. It will reduce the carbon footprint, and that $100 million bond will be paid by a difference between the utility bill before you do the efficiency work, and the utility bill after. It's a mature market in the private sector. We can do it here in Vermont and make a huge difference. I also felt it was important to walk the walk, and that's why a little over a year ago, we put 150 kW of solar panels on our own property to make sure that we were contributing as a family to the overall good and hitting that goal as a state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is another yes/no question, and Peter answered it partly earlier. And we're going to start this time with Peter. We're going to go to Matt and then to Sue. And this is a yes/no question. So we're going to do this. I think we should do this in 1 minute or less if we can. Do you support large-scale solar, large-scale wind? So you can answer both questions, yes, no, and explain.
No, and yes, where properly cited. I've outlined my concerns about industrial wind. It is environmentally destructive and not clean. It is something, there's an economic justice issue. It is located by large utilities, out-of-state multinational corporations, often in the poorest and remote part of the state, where people are least, don't want it and are least able to fight back. I think solar is terrific, but there's no reason that it needs to go right in the middle of the viewshed of a town where they don't want it. There are plenty of places where solar can be located. It needs to have proper setbacks and screening, but the way we've done it has produced an unnecessary conflict between advocates of renewable energy and town planners and citizens. That really wasn't necessary. We need to do things differently.
Thank you, Matt.
I do support wind and I do support solar. I believe that it is critical if we're going to be able to get to 90% renewable energy by 2050. The question is, how do we get there? And I think that we need to work very, very hard to not make these development decisions to become conflicts within communities, because it will slow down the process. What the experience we had in doing our 150 kW solar project was a really interesting one. We had an original location, we had 3-phase power coming by, so it was a good place to do it. And I talked to my neighbors, and they weren't so thrilled. And we worked together, we found a new location, we were able to build it, and we're all happy knowing that we're doing right by the planet and right by our immediate community. What I believe this is a time for us to bring back a discussion of really doing Act 200. When we did Act 250, we meant to do a statewide plan. We never did it. We need to do it. Now is the moment to do it so that we can move down the path on renewable energy.
Thank you. Sue?
Question, oh yeah. Absolutely, I support both wind and solar, and frankly, I find it unbelievable that some of the candidates on this campaign are talking about banning renewable energy when we need it now more than ever if we're ever going to address climate change. Do we need to be thinking broadly about where it is most suitable? Absolutely. Do we need to be thinking about planning? Absolutely. Regional, statewide plan where the assets are and how communities can site where they want to take responsibility. I propose that we actually incentivize community-based solar by creating an expedited process through the Public Service Board when we have projects where the community is on board, so that those larger projects that need to go through a much more multifaceted review and discussion are not clogging up the Public Service Board process, so we can continue to expedite and move forward quickly.
Thank you very much. So, I'm going to give you 30 seconds this time. Just because, you know.
Just because you can.
I know. Well, and then I thought, well, we'll do, after this section on climate and energy, I'm going to give you guys some rebuttal time, okay? So the next question, it's an optional one, so that's why I'm giving you 30 seconds on it. Comprehensive energy plan assumes an overall reduction in energy use of 30%. How would you fund energy efficiency and conservation measures, given that we're not raising enough money to meet that goal? And so you got 30 seconds. We're going to start with Matt. We're going to go to Sue and then Peter.
Fortunately, I already laid out the major plan to do it, which is the $100 million bond. The good news about doing a revenue bond like this, which is sometimes called an ESCO in the private market, is that it doesn't affect our current general obligation bond cap and would not have to come out of the general fund. What it would also do, by the way, is put a lot of people to work, increase our expertise and efficiency, make our apartment buildings much more livable and good places to live, and radically reduce our carbon footprint. We believe that once we do the first 100 million, we can then do another one once we've tested it.
Thank you, that was really good. You guys are going to have to talk really fast on this one, sorry. Okay, Sue?
Same question?
Yeah,
30
same
seconds.
question, 30 seconds.
And can you repeat the question?
Yeah, how would you fund energy efficiency and conservation measures given that we don't have enough money to meet that goal right now?
So as we know, Act 56 has basically put this burden on our utilities. They're required to increase efficiency investment by 15% by 2015. That is going to be the first focus, is how the utilities meet that goal. Second, we just got a $45 million investment from USDA for Efficiency Vermont. We're going to continue to leverage federal dollars. And third, we are going to continue to fund, as we currently do, through the Renewable Energy Fund. And by the way, my program would add more to that with the regional initiative that I talked about.
Okay, Peter?
Well, I agree with the points that Sue made, so I won't repeat them. But beyond that, we also have a PACE-like program where people invest in efficiency in their homes or businesses. It's added to their property tax, but the amount that's added is equal to the savings in energy consumption, and so they come out cash flow neutral.
Thank you all. This time we're going to start with Sue, then Peter, then Matt, and this is 2 minutes. If all Vermont's existing energy policies are fully implemented, Vermont will still fall short of the 90% goal by more than half. Economists on the right and the left have identified the carbon pollution tax as a policy that can incentivize fossil fuel conservation and fund projects like weatherization and public transportation. The question is, do you support carbon pricing, yes or no? If yes, what would it look like? If not, how would you meet Vermont's statutory goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 75% by 2050? Again, we're starting with Sue, 2 minutes.
Yes, I support carbon pricing. I think creating incentives to help reduce people's reliance on carbon, the carbon economy, is critical. And that's why I rolled out, as I mentioned, a plan for a regional focus, just like we have done with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that focused on a cap and trade program throughout the Northeast. It was started, in fact, under Governor Douglas's tenure. We are going to expand that to transportation, so that we will do cap the emissions and invest in alternative transportation. This is so important, and it's why I have been leading a discussion with secretaries of transportation, energy, and environment for all of the RGGI states. We have been working on this for the last 3 years. What it needs is leadership in the governor's office. This is going to have a tremendous effect of reducing emissions, creating those incentives for people to change their behavior without having a significant impact on Vermont alone. When we move as a region, we have so much more impact. Just think of the 24% emission reduction that we've achieved since 2003. Now, if we address transportation fuels, just like they are doing in the Western Climate Initiative, we will be getting at the dirtiest and the sector that we aren't addressing at all, which is 46% of our carbon footprint here. I am someone who has been in the trenches working on this program as a leader in state government and also in my community. I helped initiate our community energy committee, it's Waterbury LEAP, which has actually taken tremendous strides. Year one, we said, let's double our solar. We met that goal. Let's triple. We've now quadrupled solar investment in one community, and we can do it throughout the state.
Thank you, Peter.
So I think carbon pricing is an interesting and important concept that is worth pursuing. I don't think it's something that is very easily implemented in our one small state. I think some of the mechanisms of transfers are difficult to administer, and there are real questions of equity. I think at this time of low gas prices, we might also be considering whether we would want to increase some of the gas tax, both because it will discourage consumption and because it will fund essential infrastructure. In terms of transportation, we don't really have a very big problem in electricity. Most of that is, in fact, not carbon. Our real consumption is in home heating and in transportation. Home heating we can address with efficiency, and conservation, transportation is the very difficult one in our rural state. And the discussion that we have had about public transportation really is not going to solve the problem. If I wanted to go from my town of Townsend to Brattleboro, there is no bus. And even if there was a bus, it would still be 5 miles from my home. We live in a rural state. That's the reality. So I think the way we need to approach it is to use technology, to have apps, a concept somewhat like Uber, where you can get ride sharing. You have somebody who is a trusted driver, somebody who's a trusted passenger, and they could come pick me up at my home, go into Brattleboro, and then after I've done my shopping, there'd be somebody else who would be heading back. I think it is through ride sharing that we are going to make the biggest dent in transportation, which is the most difficult part of the equation to solve.
Thank you, Matt.
So I too believe we need to have price on carbon. And I had the experience over the last 8.5 years of working for a company that was carbon neutral. And it was amazing being a part of a company that dedicated themselves to that, not only because it was the right thing to do for the planet, but because people at Google couldn't imagine how there wouldn't be a planet where carbon would be priced. And they felt that being carbon neutral was like getting ahead of the curve, was actually a hedge, so that they would be in the right position when, as they said, the rest of the world woke up. We in Vermont have the opportunity to do the same kind of thing, because the work that I then got to do with my team was going out and identifying landfills and hog farms and finding ways to destroy methane that was coming off of those places, bringing innovative technology to be able to reduce carbon footprint all across the country. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing here in Vermont. But in order to get to a place where we're actually incentivizing that kind of investment, we need to have a cap and trade program. And it can't just be right around here. We have an opportunity to have a cap and trade program that includes Canada and California, places where they are looking forward at how we can do this together as a region. I've actually already had conversations with Catherine McKenna, who is the Minister of Energy in Canada, who is excited about that kind of collaboration. What that collaboration can also allow for is the kind of collaboration to deal with the transportation issues around carbon, like making sure that we get a passenger train that again goes back to Montreal and connects our countries together. That's how we can address this issue. This is how we can get cap and trade to work and to see the kind of investment in eliminating carbon from our atmosphere.
Thank you. So now you all have an opportunity, if you want to, for rebuttal. Does anybody want to go first? And it can be on any of the issues regarding climate and energy. Is there anybody you want to rebut? You want to go first, Peter?
I'm happy to. I just wanted to observe that I don't know of any candidate who wants to ban renewable energy. But it doesn't mean that every form of renewable energy is appropriate in every single place. I think wind is a terrific resource when it is located along highways, close to utility lines, where the wind blows consistently, or offshore. It is not appropriate where it does enormous environmental damage. It's not appropriate in a national park. It's not appropriate in a state park. And I would say to you, it is not appropriate on the ridge lines of the state of Vermont, which are some of our most precious resources from an ecological point of view. You know, some large wind projects in New Hampshire have led to the extinction of species, particularly the pine marten, an endangered species in the area, at least locally. So that's my position. I also want to say a word about the trains. Let's not kid ourselves. I'm for the train going to Montreal, but train service once a day is not going to do a darn thing to address our carbon problem, so let's stop pretending it will. It's great for tourism. It's not addressing your carbon problem.
Okay, so let's try to stay with the bell here, guys. Who wants to rebut on that whole section about carbon and energy and climate change? Sue?
Well, I just want to say that we have to go at every direction we can. We have a crisis that is affecting our entire planet. And everywhere you go, you see the impact. And if we start cutting down our options, we aren't going to get to 90% by 2050, and we're not going to get off the carbon economy. And I want to say that one train doesn't solve anything, but let me tell you, I've been working for 6 years to get that train back to Montreal, and we're going to do it. And it isn't just the trains, and it isn't just the buses, and it isn't just the bicycles, and it isn't just people walking, and it isn't just getting electric vehicles like I am. It's all of it combined. And it's all the work that you all do every day as an individual when you turn off your light, when you focus on the food you buy being local, when you ride your bike, when you walk your kid to school, when you make choices, because you know what? We are the ones we've been waiting for. The solution is with all of us.
Since the issue of trains and transportation came up, I can't help myself but to make a response. I was vice chair of the Transportation Committee when Amtrak threatened to get rid of Amtrak service to Vermont, and worked with a coalition of legislators to not only save rail transportation to Vermont, but I was sent out to Chicago with then Deputy Secretary of Transportation to negotiate a deal that brought us rail service to Rutland. And we didn't do it just for the tourism. We did it for the business travel. We did it for the improvement in the rail so that more freight would use those lines and get trucks off of our highways. It is absolutely critical that we have these kinds of systems open. They can make a huge difference. We also can continue to do great work on electric vehicles. 6 years ago, when I brought up this subject, because Karen Littman convinced me it was a great idea, I literally got laughed at. We are now leading the way in the state. We can continue to on electric vehicles.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to land use now. We're going to start with Peter, then Matt, then Sue. And a little preamble here. The locations where we build homes, businesses, and services affects how the landscape looks and functions and how much energy we use, particularly for transportation. What types of land use planning policies and investments would you promote? 2-minute response, starting with Peter.
When I was in the Senate, I drafted and introduced a bill S-100 with 17 co-sponsors to protect the contiguity of Vermont's forests. After all, forests are 80 to 90% of the land mass in the state of Vermont. And we are at a time when there's relatively little pressure on the forest in terms of development, but that may not always be the case. So to me, it was the perfect time basically to say, we're going to draw a line around the existing forests with all the existing roads and houses, and then we're going to stop development that goes, say, more than 1/3 of a mile from the existing baseline. 17 co-sponsors. But you know what happened? There was one special interest, a special interest that had made $74,000 in campaign contributions to a certain politician in our state, using corporate entities, which if it was a federal law, or if my amendment to ban corporate campaign contributions had been enacted, wouldn't have been possible. That one person was concerned that this bill could affect the enlargement of his ski area in the north of here, you know what I mean? And so the bill was reduced to a study. So if we're going to be serious about protecting our environment, we also have to be serious about taking on corporations, we have to be serious about taking on special interests, and we have to get corporate money out of our politics. I'm the one person on this stage who was in the legislature and actually was prepared to take on my party leadership to get corporate money out of Vermont's politics by banning direct corporate campaign contributions. Nobody else did. It wasn't popular, but it was important.
Thank you, Matt.
So I come to this issue somewhat hereditarily. My father, John Dunn, with Darby Bradley and Rick Carbon in our kitchen, came up with the Vermont Land Trust. And we're able to build a model, frankly, for the rest of the country in making sure that we were able to preserve our farm and forest land. I remember going with my father to some of the early Act 250 hearings and hearing him defend the land, the precious ag soils that we have and the precious forest land that we have. So this is something that when I came to the legislature, when I was elected at 22, I felt deep in my bones that we had to focus on. But there were other ways to focus on this issue. We have to make sure VHCB is well funded and that we have a strong land trust. But what I worked on was two major pieces of legislation. One was the Land Recycling Act, the first brownfields law, to create the incentives to redevelop and clean up our abandoned industrial land first. And the second was writing the Downtowns Bill, which was the first framework in the state of Vermont to prioritize resources and funding in our traditional downtown areas. Wasn't funded well before. Over a period of time, we got more resources into it, and now it is really starting to blossom. But we have to do more. We have to take steps to protect forest fragmentation, including the possibility of including in the Act 250 process. And we have to make sure that we continue to invest in our downtowns and our traditional growth centers. And that's why I have proposed to dedicate a revenue stream directly to the Housing Conservation Trust in the form of an authority so that we can front load and bond for affordable housing in our traditional downtowns, not 10 years down the road, but starting now. If we do that, we can revitalize those downtowns, invite young people to those areas, as well as allow seniors to retire there and make a big difference in our carbon footprint and land use.
Well, I'm thrilled to be asked this question because my professional degree is in land use planning. And I spent 10 years working for the Department of Housing and Community Affairs on exactly how do we preserve and complete and implement our land use goals of compact settlement patterns surrounded by that working landscape. It's what makes Vermont so unique and special, but it's also what makes Vermont energy efficient. And it's what makes compact centers make transportation and public transit work. And it's what we need to continue. It is why I have initiated a plan as part of my economic development strategy called Invest VT. And it's about building upon what we have begun, which has made a tremendous difference in our downtown program. I actually was the planner here in Montpelier and wrote the first downtown plan in 1996. And it has actually become a model for so many around this state. And I've seen what a difference it makes in transforming our downtowns for new entrepreneurship and affordable housing. The other critical feature of Vermont's policy leadership is the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, that we actually stand as a leader in this country, combining our commitment to our town centers and our affordable housing and conserving our land. This is something that we will continue as governor. I have been working on the issue of fighting sprawl. I won a $250,000 award from the Environmental Protection Agency when I worked at the Agency of Commerce to focus on land use guidelines for interstate interchanges so that we can not have sprawl in these sprawl hotspots, but in fact support downtowns, village centers. That's the future, to have vital communities where Vermonters want to grow and have families and build their homes.
Thank you. We're going to start with Matt this time, then Sue, then Peter. This is 2 minutes. Vermont data show that forest parcels are being broken up into smaller parcels as a result of development. Forest fragmentation has a negative impact on certain plants and animals, working lands, and more. Would you support strengthening Act 250 to maintain healthy forests? What other policies would you promote to conserve forests? 2 minutes, starting with that.
So the answer is yes. Forest fragmentation is a growing and large threat in our state. And we can't limit it just to the confines of our state. We need to be working in partnership with New Hampshire and New York and Massachusetts, and yes, our friends to the north, to make sure that we have a comprehensive plan, again, back to actually bringing back the idea of Act 200 at long last, so that we can address the issues of land use planning up front and make sure that we reduce the possibility of fragmentation. But I also want to talk a little bit about Act 250 and why I am such a staunch supporter of Act 250 and why I think it should be considered to incorporate forest fragmentation into it. It's because Act 250 has served us probably better than any single piece of legislation in our state. It has actually done what it was set to do. And I remember the days when it was under a brutal attack, when there were people who were on the board who were being asked to leave the board, where senators were literally voting down nominees who were doing great work on behalf of the state. I believe we have come a long way from that, but we need to be vigilant. We need to make sure everyone understands the incredible work that has been done and the incredible work that it will continue to do. Because if we are going to grow as a state, which I believe we will and we need to, the issues of Act 250, and yes, actually bringing forward the Gibbs proposal of Act 200 as it was originally envisioned, is so important right now. We have a chance to do that. We have a new governor, a new lieutenant governor, a new Speaker of the House, a new President Pro Tem. This is the time to bring together folks and chart an actual plan and path moving forward that addresses all these issues, and including forest fragmentation.
Thank you, Sue.
So I absolutely support strengthening Act 250 and in fact modernizing Act 250 as your next governor. It was a bill, an act started 50, I think, years ago. It is time for us to look at where we're at today and the incredible success that we've had in sustaining our great environmental ethic and landscape and stewardship, and also the process of citizen engagement in decision making. It is important to address forest fragmentation because we see that so much of our forest is actually in private land ownership. And I do see the focus on regulatory impacts, but also on thinking about the other side, which is how do we continue to grow the forest products industry so we can have sustainable forestry and economic development around it. I worked, as I said, at the National Wildlife Federation on the issue of sustainable forestry, and I wrote a paper about raw log exports and what they were doing to our economy instead of getting secondary forest products industry. I love the farm to plate network. I think this is a wonderful model that we need to instigate and mobilize around the forest products industry. Because when we start making an economy around our forest products industry, we will have sustainable forests. So I want to get the forest products industry together and mobilize into a network where we are actually utilizing that resource to its greatest degree. That's going to help protect even more, I think, than Act 250 regulations. I also want to say, as the former Secretary of Transportation, we looked a lot at the challenge of roads and wildlife crossing. We actually innovated and created new underpasses for wildlife. At the most, we mapped where the most important wildlife crossing areas were and looked to alternative ways to help sustain our incredible wildlife.
Thank you, Peter.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Would you support strengthening Act 250 to maintain healthy forests? What other policies would you promote to conserve forests?
Well, the answer is yes, because I already have. I just discussed S100, which was, if it had been enacted, would have been one of the most comprehensive efforts any place in the United States to protect forest land that is in private hands. As I said, it would have very much limited the possibility of any development going deep into the forest. And this is really critical. I've spent a good part of my diplomatic career dealing with international environmental issues. And what you see around the world, particularly in tropical areas, perhaps outside of the Amazon and in parts of Indonesia, is wildlife and ecosystems are becoming separated islands. And it has an enormous adverse effect on biological diversity. And the thing about biological diversity is we don't even know what we've lost. We have a pretty good idea of mammals and large species, but we have cataloged maybe 10% of the species on our planet, and they are disappearing at a very rapid rate. And so what is extraordinary about Vermont is that we are part of one of the largest temperate forests in the world. And we now have this opportunity to protect it for all time without inconveniencing the private landowners. And I think we should absolutely take that opportunity. And one of the reasons I want to be governor is I am excited about the possibility of what we can now do in the state of Vermont, not just in the short term, but something that people will look back 100 years from now and say what foresight we had in the second decade of the 21st century.
Thank you. We're going to move on to water quality, and I hate to break it to you all, but we're only halfway through. So I don't know how you're doing, but we'll keep going here. On water quality, in 2015, the Vermont legislature passed the Vermont Clean Water Act, which establishes a fund that puts a 0.2% surcharge on property transfers. That funding mechanism terminates on July 1st, 2018. We're going to start with Sue. We've got 2 minutes here for this question. Do you support maintaining the Clean Water Fund after 2018? Yes, no. If so, how will you fund it in order to address pollution in Lake Champlain?
Well, thank you. The pollution in Lake Champlain is a critical challenge. Having been at the lake when we had extraordinary algae blooms and seeing what is happening, not just to our swimming areas, but to the property values, the properties around that state, it's incredible. The lake, it's incredible. And it is going to be our job, my job as your next governor, to implement this bill. I have been working for the last 3 years on developing the action plan. As you may know, it's looking at a multifaceted focus on both transportation, agriculture, and the built environment, on non-point sources and focusing on storm water implementation. So I know what it is that we need to do. I've been working for the last 3 years doing it, and yes, we need to fund it. That's why I put forward a clean water plan back in March, and it focuses on clean water bonds. Those bonds will be used primarily for water, wastewater infrastructure, and stormwater investment. But it won't be enough just to look at that. We are going to need to go beyond, and which is why I am committed to the $24 million investment we know we need to make to support all of the farms that need to, agricultural best practices that need to be implemented, to support the communities and the towns and their back roads that need best practices to reduce stormwater on our back roads, and to help communities support stormwater utilities. That's really going to be the way that we move forward. I am watching the report that is being discussed right now under the Act to evaluate what are the key recommendations of a committee chaired by the treasurer. I will take on those recommendations and fight hard through the legislature. This will be job number one. I've been there working on this issue, working with all the bureaucracies. I'm committed to leading on clean water. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Sorry, I didn't hear an answer, I thought, to the question. So I wonder if you might ask the question again?
Funding mechanism. Do you support maintaining a clean water fund?
Yes, I do.
And if so, how will you fund it going forward after July 1st, 2018?
Same way it's funded now. So let me address the question of, more broadly, of clean water. First, I'm very happy to, I served on the Natural Resources Committee, and one of the important bits of legislation that we worked on was to improve protection of our shorelines around our lakes, because Vermont actually had the laxest rules on development around its lakes and the poorest water quality of our lakes in New England. And so I'm pleased that we went forward with buffer zones and requirements of vegetation, and that provides some protection. I think it's something that we might look further. Second, when it comes to pollution in Lake Champlain and in other waterways, the place I begin is with the people who cause the pollution. I think basically our first principle ought to be that polluters pay. And finally, since we have a tax mechanism that applies to the entire state, it's very important that the water quality work also be distributed across the state, because we will have a problem with people in the eastern part of the state where the Connecticut River watershed also has problems if their tax is only being used to deal with Lake Champlain, although Lake Champlain has to be a priority.
Thank you, Matt.
A cornerstone of Vermont's reputation is our commitment to our environment. And unfortunately, over the last couple of years, that reputation is being threatened. I can't tell you how literally embarrassed I was to have the EPA, which is not necessarily known for having the highest standards, to come to Vermont and say that we were failing our lake. And then to have that followed on by the fact that we have a carcinogen that was present in the drinking water of the people of Bennington. This is serious. We need to make sure that we are addressing this problem and that we are addressing it for the next 100 years. I have some historical perspective because my great-grandfather was the first water and sewer commissioner of Newport, Vermont. And I was up there a little while ago and they said, "Oh yeah, we still got the same pipes." And I said, "Oh, that's very funny." And they said, "No, it's not." And it's because we have infrastructure that is so old that it's literally hollowed out trees that are part of our water and sewer systems in this state. We need to take action. We need to take action now. Yes, we need to continue that revenue stream to fund water quality improvement. Yes, we need to do what is in the TMDL, and we need to go further. Yes, we need to make sure that everyone in Bennington in that area can trust that their homes will have clean water moving forward, and the same for the communities around the state that have been challenged by these issues, like Bradford. And yes, we need to be going after additional resources to make this happen. I am happy to go to anyone on Wall Street when we put real bonded dollars into cleaning up our lake and say, "You think we've got challenges on our credit rating if we spend a little bit more on this? Just imagine if our lake dies." We cannot allow that to happen. I will not allow that to happen. This is our time. We can do this.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to tell you all we're moving on to questions further down the list. So this is about toxic chemicals, which Matt was just talking about there. There are more than 85,000 chemicals registered in the United States, but the EPA has only tested about 200 for health and safety, and has only ever restricted the use of 5 chemicals. The state of Vermont has gone above federal standards to restrict harmful chemicals. Do you support Vermont continuing to enforce and enact stricter chemical standards? This is yes, no, 1 minute, and we're starting with Peter. Let me repeat the question. Do you support Vermont continuing to enforce and enact stricter chemical standards?
Yes, and I also favor what's known as the precautionary principle. In short, when it comes to chemicals or to products like neonicotinoids, let's be sure they're safe before we use them, rather than which is what they do in Europe, rather than our current system of using these things and then discovering they aren't safe and having to take remedial action.
Okay, Matt?
I absolutely do, and I think there's a real choice in this election coming up, because it's not just about the list of things that we need to be regulating ahead of the EPA, because I don't think anyone thinks we should be waiting for Congress and Washington to make decisions for us. But it's also things that we already know are really bad. Little things like mercury. And we actually have a clear choice here. In the general election, assuming that Phil Scott is going to be the nominee, he made a decision to not side with getting mercury out of our waste streams and systems. And that's a real choice for us. I was proud to be a member of the Senate when we took extraordinary measures to lead the country on removing mercury, including we had an all-night period of time where we were trying to fight for better standards. The same with the carcinogens that we're seeing, where the companies that made them knew 20 years ago that they did harm and they moved quickly through water streams. We need to hold them accountable, and we need to measure, and we need to lead the country.
Thank you, Sue. We've got 1 minute for this one. Okay.
Sorry.
So absolutely, as a mom, I have to tell you, I think so much about what are the toxic chemicals coming into our children with what they breathe, with what they eat, with the toys they play with. I'm so proud of VPIRG every year talking about those dangerous toys and the leadership that we have played. Now let's remember that the strict standards that we have, thank you to our Commissioner of Health, have actually led St. Gobain in Bennington to leave Vermont because they complained about our regulations. I was down in Bennington just the week after those poisons were found in people's wells, and to be at the homes of people looking at their wells, not knowing if the water they had drunk for generations was in fact poison. Absolutely, we will have high standards. We will continue to monitor and make sure we invest in clean water. We will continue to focus on what are the other toxic chemicals in our environment that aren't being looked at. You know, the FDA decides what it is that's safe. We have not got a clue about 80,000 chemicals in our environment.
Okay, this is the final laugh. Yes, no only. So that means you can't say anything else, but yes or no, okay?
Good luck.
Just a reminder what that means. Okay, so we are going to start with Sue. And first question is, do you support the Vermont gas pipeline? Yes or no?
The expansion, no.
Yeah, okay. Matt?
Given the information that's out there, no.
Peter?
No.
Well, well, thank you very much. Okay, next question. We're going to start with Peter and just go down the line, okay? Do you support the purchase of the Connecticut dams by the state?
Yes.
Yeah, I have to see a term sheet. I think it's an irresponsible question. I do support it. No, seriously, I do support it in concept, was a part of actually trying to put together the deal when we should have done it the last time around. Until you actually see what the deal is, you can't make a decision on that with the taxpayers' money.
Okay,
So,
well,
would love to be able to do it if the terms are
so it
right.
sounds like maybe, okay. So
In
you
concept,
could say maybe, it's okay.
yes, maybe. In concept, absolutely love the concept. But we have to know what it's going to mean to ratepayers. We need to know what it's going to mean to property taxpayers in the communities and what it's going to look like in the long term.
Okay,
I
good.
think there are other options for partnerships as well.
Okay, thanks. So now we're going to reverse order, starting with Sue, going back down the line. Peter, yes, no. Do you believe that human activities are the primary driver of climate change?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, that was easy. Okay. All right.
Does the sun rise in the east?
Okay.
Who doesn't? Is there?
Well, the group prior had a different answer.
Really?
Okay, so, maybe they did have the same answer. Did they have
They have the same answer?
Okay, everybody's on the same page, I'm sorry.
As long as we're in Vermont, I just want to make sure, okay?
I'm getting a little tired, okay. I've been up since 4 a.m. Okay, this is the next question. Do you support full statutory funding for the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, starting with Peter and ending with Sue?
Yes.
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 Oh boy, you guys are easy. Okay. We only have 2 questions left. Would you cut or maintain downtown development tax credits, starting with Sue and coming back the other way.
No, I will not cut, I will maintain and grow.
Okay.
Historic tax credit.
Okay, thanks. Matt? Support downtown tax
Support,
credits?
yes, same,
Okay,
yes.
Peter?
Support, but at the moment, they're not actually being used. And I would, because I put forward a plan to eliminate $26 million in special interest tax breaks that I dare say not a person in this room is taking advantage of. And if we do that, we can fund 4 years of free tuition at
Okay.
all Vermont state
Thanks,
colleges.
thanks very much.
Hey, we gotta do some
We're gonna
advertising.
take some free advertising. Okay. All right, last question for the evening, and this is meant to hopefully shed even more insight than we've gained already. Tell us one person, historical or current, who you see as an environmental leader who has influenced how you might lead on these issues. And I'm gonna start with Matt, and then go to Sue, and then to Peter. 1 minute, please. This is it.
There are many, but I mean, I was with Bill McKibben yesterday, and I think he has done extraordinary work. And the way that, how much time do we have?
1 minute.
1 minute. And the way that he has done it is both from speaking loud, but also empowering the grassroots. Using technology to be able to share ideas, to make sure that people feel comfortable in standing up for what they believe, even if they feel like there may be some opposition that's out there. And that work has fundamentally changed the entire discussion around climate change. You know, a professor from Middlebury transforming the major economic and environmental issue of our time. And I couldn't be more proud to call him a friend, and we should absolutely feel pride in calling him a Vermonter, because the work that he has done has been extraordinary. We need to back him, and we need to be the state that models Bill McKibben's vision so that the rest of the country will follow.
Thank you. Sue?
Well, at the risk of not repeating myself, because obviously such a great leader, but the first name that came to my mind is Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. Because she, I think, really had a tremendous impact on our understanding of what we were doing to our environment. I know that that work transformed me as a person, and actually, I think, became the seed for the entire environmental movement and all of the landmark legislation in Congress in the 1970s, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and then subsequently TSCA. And looking at our toxics in our environment, I really think we can all go back to the words from Silent Spring. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.
Well, I'm very admiring of the two previous choices, but I will offer Gaylord Nelson, who was a senator from Wisconsin who initiated Earth Day. And most memorably, in a hearing, Gaylord Nelson observed that if you took a vote of all the species on the planet, they would vote unanimously against the human being. Well, not quite unanimously, he said. There is the dog. We might say the dog is the Uncle Tom of the animal kingdom.
Well, that's it, folks. Thank you so much. Please give a round of applause.
Just wanted to say on behalf of Vermont Conservation Voters and Vermont Natural Resources Council, we're so grateful you all came out. We thank the candidates so much for sharing their perspectives on these issues we all care so much about. Thank you, Anne, for moderating. And we're going to vote on the night.
So you guys had fun.